On July 12, 2017, a typical hot summer evening enveloped the quiet suburban neighborhood of Bakersfield, California. The clock indicated 10:42 p.m. and the air was still. However, within the confines of a modest residence on Claremont Drive, tensions were mounting, and events were on the verge of spiraling out of control. Unbeknownst to the community, this marked the onset of a tragic sequence of occurrences that would leave a lasting impact. This is a narrative of love, obsession, and murder, a true crime case resolution that reveals the unsettling story of an illicit romance that took a disastrous turn. John Carter, a 38-year-old man, appeared to lead a tranquil life as a longtime resident of Bakersfield. He enjoyed the respect of his neighbors and held a well-paying position as a construction manager. To the outside observer, John seemed to possess everything: a stable career, a beautiful home, and a family. However, his marriage was far from idyllic. Beneath the surface, the affection between John and his wife, Rachel, had long since diminished, giving way to bitterness and resentment that mostly remained concealed behind closed doors. During these tumultuous times, John's life took a sinister turn. It began innocently enough when Sarah Mitchell, the 22-year-old daughter of John's neighbors, returned home from college for the summer. The Mitchells had been close family friends of the Carters for years. Sarah was known for her politeness and cheerful demeanor, often greeting neighbors and engaging in small talk. Yet, this summer, a noticeable change had occurred. Sarah had transformed into a striking young woman, capturing John's attention. Initially, it was a mere observation. The admiration that initially seemed harmless from a distance transformed into a complex situation. Sarah, with her vibrant energy, provided a striking contrast to the tense atmosphere within John's household. Frequently, she would be found outside, engrossed in a book or listening to music, while John observed her from his backyard. As time progressed, their brief interactions evolved into more extended conversations, and John experienced a sense of vitality in Sarah's company that he had not felt in years. Flattered by the attention of an older man, Sarah began to relish their discussions as well. What began as light-hearted exchanges gradually developed into a perilous and clandestine romance, one that would ultimately lead to severe repercussions. By mid-August, their encounters had intensified into late-night meetings under the veil of darkness, where they concealed their burgeoning affection from inquisitive eyes. John found himself captivated by this affair, which provided a respite from the stifling reality of his marriage. Unbeknownst to him, however, someone was observing someone determined to unveil their secret. Rachel, John's wife, had grown increasingly suspicious of her husband's erratic behavior. He was returning home later than usual, spending excessive time in the backyard, and exhibiting unusual secrecy with his phone. Despite her multiple confrontations, John consistently dismissed her concerns, attributing them to her paranoia. Nevertheless, Rachel's instincts were keen, and she sensed that something was amiss. One evening, when John claimed to be going for a late-night jog, Rachel decided to follow him. What she witnessed that night shattered her world. In the shadows of a nearby park, she saw John embracing Sarah, and in that instant, Rachel's heart sank, her mind racing with disbelief. Overwhelmed by feelings of rage and betrayal, Rachel grappled with the reality that the man she had devoted her life to, the father of their children, had deceived her with the young woman living next door. Rather than confronting him immediately, Rachel chose a more chilling path. She allowed her anger to simmer, silently devising a plan for revenge. As the weeks unfolded, the atmosphere in the Carter household became increasingly unbearable. Rachel's cold demeanor was unmistakable, yet she concealed her discoveries from John, who remained unaware of the turmoil surrounding him. He continued his clandestine relationship with Sarah, the couple meeting in secret while Rachel observed their every interaction. On September 4, 2017, the situation reached a breaking point. That evening, John received a mysterious text message instructing him to meet at the old cabin on Highway 58 and to come alone. Although the message seemed to be from Sarah, something about it felt unsettling. John hesitated but ultimately succumbed to the allure of the unknown. He drove to the location, a decrepit cabin on the outskirts of Bakersfield, notorious for its eerie, abandoned atmosphere. Once a hunting lodge, it had long since fallen into disrepair. As John arrived, the air was thick with tension, and his heart raced as he approached the cabin, expecting to find Sarah. However, the scene that greeted him was nightmarish. Upon stepping inside, the door slammed shut behind him. In the dim light, he saw Rachel standing there, her face contorted with fury, her eyes ablaze with hatred, and a gun clutched in her hand. "I know everything," she hissed, her voice quaking with a blend of anger and heartbreak. "You've been lying to me." John had been secretly involved with another woman, and now Rachel was determined to make him pay for his betrayal. Shocked and bewildered, John attempted to reason with her, but Rachel was beyond the point of listening. The sense of betrayal had driven her to the brink, and she was resolute in her intention to make John suffer for his actions. "You have destroyed our family," she declared, her grip on the gun tightening. "Now, I will destroy you." Terrified, John pleaded for his life, promising to end the affair and asking for another chance. However, Rachel had made up her mind. In mere seconds, the tension in the room escalated to a breaking point, culminating in the sound of a single gunshot that reverberated through the empty cabin. John collapsed to the floor, blood pooling around him, while Rachel stood frozen, the gravity of her actions beginning to dawn on her. Unbeknownst to Rachel, her nightmare was far from over. Just outside the cabin, concealed in the shadows, someone was watching an unexpected figure caught in this tragic web of deceit and betrayal. Rachel remained in stunned silence, the echoes of the gunshot still ringing in her ears. As she gazed at John's lifeless body, the reality of her deed settled in. She had committed the unthinkable. She had killed her husband. The anger that had fueled her for weeks was now replaced by an overwhelming sense of dread. Just as she stood there, paralyzed by shock, a faint rustling outside the cabin sent a chill down her spine. She was not alone. Rachel's breath caught in her throat as she realized someone had been observing her, and she quickly scanned the dimly lit room. Her gaze flicked to the windows, where the thick darkness outside obscured any view, yet she sensed a presence lurking just beyond the door. Panic surged within her. What if they had witnessed everything? What if they were aware of her actions? Without a moment's hesitation, Rachel dashed toward the cabin's back door, leaving John's lifeless body behind as she fled into the night. Her heart raced as she stumbled through the dense underbrush, branches clawing at her arms and face. She had no clear destination. All that mattered was her need to escape. The weight of the gun felt burdensome in her grip, yet she could not bring herself to relinquish it. It had become both her shield and her curse. However, Rachel's flight would be fleeting. Just as she neared the edge of the woods, the shrill wail of police sirens pierced the night's stillness, and red and blue lights flickered ominously in the distance, rapidly approaching. She halted, her mind racing. Someone must have alerted the authorities, but who? There was no time for contemplation. She needed to act swiftly. Rachel sprinted back toward her car, parked a short distance from the cabin. She tossed the gun into the back seat and accelerated out of the driveway, tires screeching as she sped down the dark highway. She had to return home to devise her next steps, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the unsettling rustling outside the cabin. Who had been there? Was it Sarah, or worse, had Sarah's father, Mark Mitchell, uncovered the affair? Meanwhile, the Bakersfield Police Department had received a 911 call from a passerby who reported witnessing a disturbance. A vehicle of interest was spotted outside the dilapidated cabin, prompting officers to arrive at the location within minutes. Upon their arrival, they discovered the lifeless body of John Carter, lying in a pool of blood. The cabin, which had been deserted for years, was now designated as a crime scene, yet the perpetrator, Rachel, was nowhere to be located. Meanwhile, at the Carter residence, the night was far from over. Rachel had just entered the house when she was met by her concerned teenage daughter, Lily. "Mom, where have you been? What's happening?" Lily inquired, her voice laced with worry. Rachel, her attire disheveled and her complexion pale, struggled to keep her composure. "Nothing, sweetheart. "Please go back to bed," she replied, her voice quivering. However, Lily remained unconvinced, sensing that something was terribly amiss. Hours later, the police arrived at the Carter home, knocking on the door and rousing the entire family. Rachel's heart sank as she opened the door to find two officers standing before her. "Mrs. Carter," one of the officers began, his tone grave, "we need to ask you a few questions regarding your husband, John." Rachel's stomach twisted with dread. She had anticipated this moment, yet now that it had arrived, she felt unprepared. She nodded and allowed the officers to enter, striving to maintain her composure as they seated her in the living room. "We received a report of an incident at a cabin on Highway 58, the officer continued. "Your husband's body was found at the scene." Rachel gasped, struggling to process the shock. "John is dead." I don't understand," she stammered, her mind racing to keep pace with the unfolding events. The officers regarded her with suspicion, but for the time being, they lacked concrete evidence to connect her to the crime. Rachel's thoughts repeatedly returned to Sarah Mitchell. Where was she now? Had she been the one lurking outside the cabin, and if so, what information did she possess? It was not long before the police arrived at the Mitchell residence. Mark Mitchell, Sarah's father, had been increasingly worried about his daughter's relationship with John. He had observed the way John gazed at Sarah and the secretive glances they exchanged. However, Mark never anticipated that his concerns would culminate in a fatal confrontation. When the police knocked on the Mitchell's door, Mark answered, his face pale and drawn. "Is everything okay?" he inquired, his voice trembling. The officers did not hesitate in their response. "We are investigating the murder of John Carter," one of them stated. "We would like to speak with your daughter, Sarah." At the mention of her name, Sarah emerged from the hallway, her eyes wide with fear. She had been dreading this moment, fully aware that her clandestine affair with John would soon be revealed. However, she was unprepared for the devastating news that followed. "John is dead," the officer said bluntly. "We found his body earlier tonight." Sarah's world crumbled around her. She had understood the risks associated with their affair, but she never envisioned it would lead to murder. Her mind raced as she attempted to comprehend the situation, but there was no time for sorrow. The officers began their questioning, and Sarah quickly recognized that her every statement could either implicate her or exonerate her as the investigation progressed. She ultimately disclosed the truth about her relationship with John, acknowledging the complexities involved. For several months, they had been engaged in an affair, yet she maintained that she had no involvement in his murder. "I loved him," she murmured, tears cascading down her cheeks. "I would never harm him." Nevertheless, the police remained skeptical. Sarah's close association with John, the timing of his demise, and the fact that she had been seen with him earlier that evening rendered her a primary suspect. The Bakersfield community was shaken by the scandal, news of the affair spread rapidly, and rumors regarding Sarah's potential involvement in John's murder began to circulate. However, the investigation took an unexpected turn when authorities discovered a significant piece of evidence: the firearm Rachel had used to kill John, carelessly left in the back seat of her vehicle. With the evidence mounting against her, Rachel was arrested and charged with her husband's murder. She insisted on her innocence, asserting that she had acted in self-defense upon learning of John's affair. Yet, the reality was clear: Rachel had been overwhelmed by jealousy and rage, and in a moment of uncontrollable fury, she had taken John's life. As the trial commenced, the courtroom was charged with tension. The prosecution depicted Rachel as a cold, calculating individual who had orchestrated the murder out of revenge, while the defense contended that she was a devastated wife driven to the edge by her husband's betrayal. Ultimately, the jury found Rachel guilty of second-degree murder. Rachel Carter was sentenced to 25 years in prison, leaving behind a fractured family and a community irrevocably altered by the events of that tragic night. As for Sarah, she relocated from Bakersfield in an attempt to escape the lingering shadows of the past. Tragedy that had consumed her life, but no matter how far she ran she would never be able to forget the man she once loved and the deadly consequences of their illicit romance. This has been another episode of True Crime Case Resolution. The story of John Carter and the deadly affair that unraveled his life is a reminder of how fragile trust and love can be and how the darkest secrets can tear families apart. Stay tuned for more gripping true crime stories that okay.